The dock lights of Cinderate station flickered like nervous eyelids, unable to decide whether to stay open or shut against the cosmic dark. The air here tasted of recycled oxygen ozone and the metallic tang of anxiety. It was the smell of a place where people waited for things that rarely arrived on time, and when they did arrive, they were rarely what was promised. For Grace, the air tasted like a cage. She stood in the airlock of the transport frigate, the hydraulic hiss of the door opening, sounding dangerously like a beast inhaling before a scream. She could feel the vibration of the station's deck plates, through the soles of her boots, a low-frequency hum that grated against her heightened senses. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a rhythm too fast, too loud, betraying the calm mask she had plastered onto her face. Below, on the receiving platform, a crowd had gathered. They were a smear of colors and noise faces, upturned recording devices blinking like a field of artificial fireflies. They were here for the show. They were here for the fairy tale union, as the Hollow News had branded it for the last 3 weeks. Grace stepped forward. The silence that hit the dock was not the silence of awe. It was the silence of a collective intake of breath, followed immediately by the shattering of expectations. She was tall. Not just statuesque, not just model tall. She was formidable. She stood nearly 7 feet, her shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a collapsed star, her movements possessing a predatory fluidity that unnerved the human eye. Her skin held a faint pearlescent shimmer, a biological reaction to the ambient starlight, and her eyes were liquid gold framed by hair that seemed to move on its own in the static charged air. She was a star wolf, a biological marvel of the outer rim, but here under the harsh, unforgiving halogen lights of the core worlds, she was simply too much. She saw the exact moment the crowd decided she was a monster. It rippled through them like a wave. Smiles faltered. Recording devices lowered slightly, then raised again, zooming in, not on her face, but on the sharp curve of her claws, the density of her muscle, the sheer, undeniable alienness of her presence. "Dinosaur-sized," someone whispered the audio pickup, carrying it clearly to her sensitive ears. "Look at the size of her," another voice muttered. "That is not a bride. That is a siege engine." Grace tightened her grip on the small travel case in her hand. The handle creaked under the pressure. "Do not break it," she told herself. "Do not growl. Do not let them see the teeth." At the center of the platform stood Cyrus Fane. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than the annual oxygen budget of a mining colony, a shimmering white fabric that repelled dirt and apparently shame. He held a bouquet of rare synth orchids, his smile practiced, camera-ready, a perfect arrangement of white teeth and charming dimples. He stepped forward as Grace descended the ramp, his arms opening in a welcoming gesture, rehearsed for maximum emotional impact on the evening news. "My dearest Grace," Cyrus began, his voice projected by unseen speakers, smooth as velvet. "Welcome to your new—" He stopped. Grace had reached the bottom of the ramp. She stood directly in front of him. In the promotional holograms, heavily edited and perspective shifted, they had appeared to be of equal height, a harmonious couple. In reality, Grace towered over him. Her shadow swallowed him whole. The smile on Cyrus's face did not disappear. It simply froze, losing all warmth, turning into a rictus of panic. He looked up, and up, his eyes widening. He looked like a man who had ordered a decorative lapdog and received a dire wolf. For 3 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the ventilation fans. Then, Cyrus leaned in his voice, dropping to a hiss that the microphones would not catch, though the venom in it was clear enough to Grace. "What is this?" he whispered, his eyes darting to the cameras and back to her. The file said exotic. It did not say industrial. Grace looked down at him, her golden eyes cooling. "The file contained my biometrics, Cyrus. Standard galactic measurements." Cyrus let out a short, nervous laugh, stepping back, creating distance between them. He turned to the crowd, his smile straining at the edges. "A magnificent specimen, is she not? The camera adds 10 pounds, or Perhaps the intake system had a wide-angle lens glitch. He was floundering. He was making a joke of her. Grace felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, the burning shame of being looked at, but not seen. She was a prop that had arrived in the wrong size. "Security," Cyrus muttered into his lapel comms, his voice tight. "Stand by. This feels unpredictable." And then the universe decided to intervene. It started as a sound, a deep, resonant groan that seemed to come from the bones of the station itself. The lights overhead flared, turning from clinical white to emergency red, then back again. "Starfall warning," a mechanical voice blared, stripping all emotion from the catastrophe. "Gravitational anomaly detected. Sector 4 through Sector 9. Brace." It was not just a warning. It was here. The Starfall. The seasonal phenomenon where the meridian rift bled exotic particles into normal space, slammed into Cinderate Station. Gravity did not just fail. It rebelled. One moment the crowd was standing. The next, the laws of physics shattered. People were thrown upward as if the floor had become a catapult. Cargo containers stacked neatly by the loading bay groaned and tore free from their magnetic locks, tumbling through the air like heavy, lethal confetti. Screams erupted, tearing through the sudden chaotic noise of bending metal. Cyrus Fane, the man who controlled half the trade routes in the sector, yelped a high, undignified sound as he was lifted off his feet. He flailed, grabbing at a stanchion, his synth orchid scattering into the air like debris. Grace felt it too. The nausea hit her first, a twisting in her gut, as the local gravity inverted. But unlike the humans, her biology was forged in the void. Her inner ear did not panic. It calibrated. She saw a heavy cargo loader, tons of steel and hydraulic fluid drifting loose. It was rotating slowly, lethally, on a collision course, with a group of terrifyingly silent children huddled near the viewing barricade. There was no time to think. There was only the instinct that had been bred into her lineage for 1,000 years. Grace dropped the travel case. She planted her feet, her boots engaging their magnetic clamps, with a solid thud. She threw her head back, her chest expanding, absorbing the erratic energy of the starfall that saturated the air. And she howled. It was not the sound of a wild animal. It was a sonic resonance, a precise, biological counterfrequency. It started low, a rumble that vibrated in the teeth of everyone on the dock, and then climbed pure and crystalline, cutting through the panic and the noise of the dying station. The sound hit the air like a physical force. Where the sound waves traveled, the chaotic dust of the starfall froze. The shimmering particles that were disrupting the gravitons were caught in the resonance of her voice. They aligned. They organized. The cargo loader just feet away from the children stopped in midair. It shuddered, caught in a web of invisible sonic pressure, and then gently, impossibly, it lowered to the deck. Around the dock, the chaotic gravity smoothed out. People who were floating helplessly drifted down, landing with bruised knees and shaken nerves. The groaning of the station metal ceased, replaced by the fading echo of Grace's voice. She stood there, chest heaving, her throat burning from the effort. The golden shimmer on her skin was pulsing now, bright and rhythmic. She had used the resonance, the very thing she had been told to hide, the thing that made her dangerous. Silence returned to the dock. But this time it was heavy with fear. A woman near the front scrambled backward, dragging her child with her. "Did you see that?" she hissed. "She controlled the fall. She is one of them. A siren." "Weapon," a man muttered, eyeing Grace's claws. "She is a weapon." Cyrus Fane pulled himself up from the floor. His suit was rumpled, his hair ruined. He looked at Grace, and for a moment, she expected gratitude. She expected him to see that she had saved his investment, his station, his life. Instead, she saw calculation. He smoothed his jacket, his face hardening. He saw the fear in the crowd. He knew that fear sold better than romance. He knew that a savior was hard to control, but a monster could be caged. "Security!" Cyrus shouted, his voice cracking with feigned authority. "Isolate her! The creature is causing the gravitational spikes. She is manipulating the starfall." Grace stepped back, her heart sinking. "I stopped it," she said, her voice rough. "I saved them." "You are a biological hazard," Cyrus pointed a shaking finger at her. "Look at her. She is glowing. She is radioactive. Get her into a containment cell before she brings the whole roof down." The security drones, hovering uncertainly, turned their red optical sensors toward Grace. The crowd backed away, forming a wide, terrified circle. They had forgotten the falling container. They only saw the wolf who had spoken to the stars. Grace bared her teeth, not in aggression but in a grimace of betrayal. She had expected rejection. She had not expected to be criminalized for survival. "Hold your fire!" a voice cut through the tension. It was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the security chief pause. A man stepped out from the shadow of a maintenance hatch. He was wearing coveralls that had been gray once, but were now stained with oil biological fluids and the distinct blue smear of synth gel. He looked like he hadn't slept in 30 hours. His hair was a mess of dark curls, and he held a portable diagnostic scanner in one hand, as if it were a weapon. This was Dr. Luther. He didn't look at Cyrus. He didn't look at the armed drones. He walked straight toward Grace, ignoring the perimeter the guards were trying to establish. "Stay back," Cyrus warned. "That thing is unstable." Luther stopped 5 feet from Grace. He didn't look up at her face immediately. He looked at her hands. Her fists were clenched at her sides, and there was a fine, rapid tremor running through her muscles, the aftershock of channeling that much energy. "She is not unstable," Luther said, his voice calm, rasping slightly. "She is in hypocalcemic shock. You can see the tremor in the extensor tendons." He finally looked up, meeting Grace's golden eyes. There was no fear in his gaze. There was no disgust. There was only the analytical, tired compassion of a man who had seen everything break and knew how to put most of it back together. "High-frequency resonance burns calories like a furnace," Luther said to her, speaking as if they were the only two people in the room. "You need electrolytes, not a prison cell." Grace stared at him. "Who are you?" Luther ignored the question and turned to Cyrus. "You put her in a containment cell with standard dampening fields, and her bioelectric rhythm will crash. She will be dead in 20 minutes. Is that good for your rating, Cyrus?" Cyrus bristled, recognizing the man, but unable to place him. "She is dangerous, you grease monkey. She attacked the station's gravity." "She stabilized a localized singularity event," Luther corrected, checking the readout on his scanner. "And she did it without a containment suit. If I were you, I would be thanking her. But since you are you, I assume you are just calculating how to sue her for the damage to your hair." A small, spherical drone hovered over Luther's shoulder. This was Bolt. The drone spun its single optic eye toward Cyrus. "Analysis complete," Bolt chirped in a cheerful synthetic tenor. "Subject feigns hair gel constitutes a chemical hazard greater than the lady's resonance. Probability of him being a jerk, 100%. "Silence that machine," Cyrus shrieked. "Take her. I want her out of my sight. She is a liability." The security guards stepped forward, stun batons crackling. Luther moved. He didn't fight. He simply stepped between the weapons and Grace. It was a suicidal move for a mechanic against armed corporate security, but he did it with the casual indifference of someone who knew exactly where the line was. "I am asserting medical jurisdiction," Luther announced. "Code 77 Alpha. Suspected contagions related to Starfall exposure. Unless you want me to report to the health board that you are detaining a carrier of a potential Class 4 pathogen in a civilian dock, you will let me transport her to a secure medical facility." The security chief hesitated. "Class 4. "Look at the glow," Luther gestured to Grace's skin. "Do you want to touch that? I don't." It was a lie. A magnificent bluffing lie. Grace's glow was harmless bioluminescence, a side effect of the adrenaline. But the guards didn't know that. They only knew that Starfall sickness was messy, expensive, and lethal. They lowered their batons. Cyrus looked at Luther, his eyes narrowing. "You are that vet, the one who patches up the stray cargo beasts." "Dr. Luther," he corrected mildly. "And she is my patient now. Unless you want to sign the liability waiver for a planetary-scale pandemic." Cyrus looked at Grace, huge, glowing, and terrifying, and then at the cameras. He made a snap decision. "Get her out. If she is sick, she is not my problem. I wash my hands of this broken contract." He turned his back on Grace, snapping his fingers at his assistants to cut the feed. Luther let out a breath he had been holding. He turned to Grace, keeping his voice low. "Can you walk, or do you need a stretcher?" "I have a stretcher, but it was designed for a Highland yak, so it might be a tight fit." Grace looked at the small, disheveled man. "Why?" she asked. "Why the stretcher? Because yaks are wide." "Why are you helping me?" Luther glanced at the security guards who were still watching them with twitchy fingers. "Because I have a rule," he said, tapping his scanner. "I do not let people put living things in cages just because they do not understand how they work. Now walk. Look scary if you have to. It helps." Grace straightened her spine. She let a low, rumbling growl vibrate in her chest, the sound of tectonic plates shifting. The crowd parted instantly. They walked through the station, an odd procession, the giant, shimmering wolf-woman, the tired mechanic, and the sarcastic drone. Up on the observation deck, hidden in the shadows of a ventilation overhang, Harper Wren watched them go. She adjusted her thick spectacles, chewing on a piece of synthetic gum. She had seen a lot of things pass through Cinderate: smugglers, princes, refugees. But she had never seen Luther intervene in a high-profile mess like this. "Interesting," Harper muttered to herself. She pulled up a holographic notepad and zoomed in on the retreating medical transport. She logged the license plate number. "Very interesting. The vet comes out of his hole for the giant bride. That is a story worth 10 credits at least." Outside, the air was colder. The ambulance was a battered, hovering brick of a vehicle, painted a faded white with a green cross that had been partially peeled off. Luther opened the back doors. "Hop in. Sorry about the smell. I had a sick bog strider in here yesterday. It smells like sulfur and regret." Grace climbed in. The interior was cramped for her, but it was warm. She sat on the metal bench, her knees drawn up, trying to make herself small. Luther climbed into the driver's seat and Bolt plugged himself into the dashboard. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then hummed to life. As they pulled away from the dock, leaving the flickering lights of Cinderate behind, Grace stared at the back of Luther's head. "You lied to them," she said. "I am not contagious." "I know," Luther said, his eyes on the traffic lanes. "But fear is the only language Cyrus Fane speaks fluently. I just translated for him." "He called me a dinosaur," Grace said. The hurt was still there under the anger. "He is an idiot," Bolt chimed in from the dashboard. "Dinosaurs had much smaller cranial capacities. You clearly have superior cognitive functions. And better teeth." "Thank you, Bolt," Luther sighed. "You are not helping." "I am providing emotional support through factual analysis," the drone retorted. Grace looked down at her hands. The tremor was fading, but the shame was not. "I barely know you. You took a risk. Security could have arrested you." Luther navigated the ambulance into the merge lane, heading away from the glittering commercial districts and toward the dark industrial side of the moon's orbit. "I saw your wrist," Luther said quietly. "My wrist." "You were shaking," Luther said. "Not from fear, from restraint. You had the power to crush that platform, Grace. You could have torn that station apart when the gravity failed. But you didn't. You held it together. You saved the people who were mocking you." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His eyes were dark, shadowed by fatigue, but sharp. "I see a lot of animals and people who lash out when they are hurt," Luther continued. It takes a very specific kind of strength to protect the thing that is hurting you. I respect that. Grace fell silent. She looked out the reinforced window. The stars were streaking by, blurred by the atmospheric shield. I have nowhere to go, she admitted. It was the hardest thing she had said all day. I spent my last credits getting here. The contract with Fane included housing. It is void now. Well, Luther said, scratching his chin. My clinic is not the Ritz. It is located on a localized moon that the terraforming committee forgot about 50 years ago. The roof leaks when it rains acid. The coffee is terrible. And my assistant is a drone with a superiority complex. I heard that, Bolt said. But, Luther added, it is quiet. And nobody looks at you unless they are asking for help. You can stay tonight. We can figure out the rest in the morning. Grace hesitated. Trust was a currency she had run out of a long time ago. But she remembered the way he had stood between her and the stun batons. She remembered that he hadn't flinched at her size. Doctor, she asked. Just Luther. Doctor makes me feel like I should be charging you. Luther, she tested the name. It sounded solid, earthy. I eat a lot. My metabolism is high. Luther smiled. It was a small, fleeting thing, but it changed his face, making him look 10 years younger. I have seen a baby space whale eat 3 tons of plankton paste in one sitting, Luther said. I think we can manage breakfast. Grace leaned back against the cold metal wall of the ambulance. For the first time since she had left her home system, the tightness in her chest loosened just a fraction. Outside, the first streaks of the Starfall began to intensify, painting the black void with ribbons of violet and gold. The universe was breaking apart, the meridian rift was opening, and the storm was coming. But for tonight, in the back of a smelling, rattling ambulance, she was not a monster. She was just a passenger. Okay, Grace whispered, closing her eyes. One night, Luther nodded, turning the wheel, guiding them away from the light of the station and into the comforting dark. One night, he agreed. The ambulance thrusters flared, carrying them toward the desolate moon that hung in the sky like a forgotten promise. The clinic smelled of antiseptic wet fur and the metallic tang of impending wild weather. It was not a sterile white box like the hospitals in the core worlds. It was a structure that felt cobbled together from ship parts, asteroid rock, and stubbornness. It sat on the edge of a jagged crater, on a moon that the star maps usually labeled simply as Designation 89 Alpha, a place where the atmosphere was thin and the wind howled like a choir of banshees 20 hours a day. Grace stood in the center of what Luther called the triaging bay, though it looked more like a mechanic's garage converted into a stable. Her head nearly brushed the overhead piping, and she had to consciously keep her elbows tucked in to avoid knocking over stacks of crates marked with biohazard symbols. Welcome to the sanctuary, Luther said, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag that was already black. It is not much, but the gravity plating is stable and the coffee machine works about 60% of the time. He walked over to a large glass-walled enclosure, where a creature that looked like a cross between a cephalopod and a panther was pacing nervously. Its skin shifted colors, blue, violet, terrified gray. That is a chromatic stalker, Luther explained, his voice dropping to a soothing murmur as he approached the glass. Found him hiding in the landing gear of a freighter. He has got a respiratory infection from breathing exhaust fumes for 3 weeks. Grace watched him. She had expected a laboratory. She had expected cold steel and restraints. Instead, the room was filled with soft yellow light from heat lamps and the gentle bubbling of nutrient tanks. There were blankets, actual woolen blankets piled in the corners of the cages. It is crowded, Grace said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. It is a halfway house for the things nobody wants, a mechanical voice chirped. Bolt, the spherical drone, hovered down from the rafters. He spun his single ocular lens towards Grace, scanning her from boots to mane. And, speaking of things nobody wants, Bolt continued, I have scanned your caloric requirements. You are going to bankrupt us in protein blocks within 4 days. I hope you like synth algae paste. It tastes like despair, but it is nutritious. Bolt, Luther warned, without looking up from the stalker's tank. Be nice. I am being practical, Bolt retorted. We are running a clinic, not a zoo for mythological giants. But since you are here, giant lady, here are the ground rules. Rule number 1. Don't eat the patients. I know you are a predator class, but the 3-legged goat in Sector 4 is named Barnaby, and he is a friend, not a snack. Grace blinked. The absurdity of the statement caught her off guard. For the last month, people had looked at her with terror or lust. They had calculated her kill potential, or her breeding value. Nobody had ever worried about her eating a goat named Barnaby. A sound bubbled up in her chest. It felt foreign, rusty. It escaped her throat as a short, bark-like laugh. She covered her mouth, instantly surprised by the sound. She laughs, Bolt exclaimed, spinning in a joyful circle. Sensors detect a 20% reduction in "I am going to murder everyone" vibes. Excellent progress. Luther looked over his shoulder, and for a second his tired eyes crinkled. Don't mind him. He thinks he is the comic relief in a tragedy. Come here, Grace, I want to show you something. Show. Grace approached the tank. The chromatic stalker hissed, its skin flashing a warning red. Grace instinctively stiffened her claws, extending slightly, a reflex honed by years of being forced to fight in illegal arenas for the amusement of crime lords. Easy, Luther said. He didn't look at Grace. He looked at the creature. He placed his hand flat against the glass. He didn't flinch when the creature lunged. He is just scared. The Starfall messes with their navigational senses. Imagine if the floor suddenly felt like the ceiling, and the air tasted like static. You would be cranky too. Grace watched Luther's hand. It was a human hand, fragile, small, made of soft skin and breakable bone. Yet it was steady. He began to tap a rhythm on the glass, a slow, heartbeat cadence. Thump, 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 thump. Slowly, the stalker stopped pacing. Its colors softened back to a calm blue. It pressed its snout against the glass, right where Luther's hand was. You speak to them, Grace said softly. I listen to them, Luther corrected. Most people shout at animals. They give commands. Sit, stay, kill. They forget that these things have their own minds, their own fears. He turned to look at her. Kind of like how Cyrus Fane treated you. He saw a trophy. He didn't see the person shivering because the air conditioning was too cold. Grace looked away, the shame of the spaceport prickling at her skin again. I was not shivering from cold. I know, Luther said gently. But you are safe here. The walls are reinforced titanium alloy. The door codes change every 12 hours. And I have a very aggressive lawyer on retainer, though Bolt usually just hangs up on people until they go away. I cannot stay for free, Grace said suddenly. The words rushed out. She hated debt. Debt was a chain, and she had worn enough chains. I have no credits. Cyrus canceled my account access. But I can work. I am strong. Luther stood up, wiping his hands again. He looked at her. Really, looked at her, measuring not her size, but her intent. We have a perimeter fence that keeps the atmospheric acid wolves out, Luther said. The gravity generators on the North Ridge are misaligned. They require manual adjustment. The wrench weighs about 80 pounds. I usually have to use a hydraulic lift to move it. Grace flexed her hand. 80 pounds was nothing. I will fix it. And the floors need scrubbing, Bolt added helpfully. And the roof leaks. And if you could intimidate the delivery pilot into actually landing on the pad, instead of the flower bed, that would be great. Start with the fence, Luther said. But Grace, if the storm picks up, come inside. I do not care how tough you are. Starfall rain burns through standard environmental suits in 10 minutes. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm that Grace had not expected. She had spent her life being moved from cage to stage to cargo hold. Her existence had been defined by waiting, waiting to be sold, waiting to be evaluated, waiting to be rejected. Work, she discovered, was a different kind of waiting. It was active. It was reclaiming ownership of her own body. She fixed the gravity fence in 4 hours. The heavy Durasteel pylons, which would have taken a team of 3 humans to shift, she lifted and drove into the rocky soil with her bare hands. When the heavy wrench needed to be turned, she didn't need the hydraulic assist. She simply braced her shoulder and pushed until the metal groaned and the locking mechanism clicked home. For the first time, her size wasn't an obstacle. It was an asset. In the afternoons, she helped in the clinic. At first, the animals were terrified of her. The scent of an apex predator coming off her skin made the smaller grazers bleat and hide under their straw. "You are projecting too much," Luther told her on the second day. They were in the recovery ward, trying to change the bandages on a 6-legged reptile that had been burned by a fuel leak. "You are walking in here like you are expecting a fight. They can smell the adrenaline." "I am always expecting a fight," Grace muttered, holding the reptile down. It thrashed its tail, whipping against her arm. "Stop," Luther said. He put a hand on her forearm. His touch was warm, startlingly human against her cool, starlight-infused skin. "Breathe, Grace. Lower your heart rate. If you are calm, they are calm." Grace closed her eyes. She focused on the hum of the ventilation, the smell of the antiseptic, the steady beat of Luther's heart standing next to her. She visualized the dust motes floating in the air. She let the tension in her shoulders drop. Under her hands, the reptile stopped thrashing. It let out a soft hiss and went limp. "See," Luther smiled. "You are a natural. You just needed permission to stop being a warrior for 5 minutes." Grace looked at him, and for a moment the air in the room felt thick, charged with something that wasn't just static electricity. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the gray hairs hidden in his messy curls. She saw a man who was carrying a weight just as heavy as hers, but he carried it inside where no one could see. "Who are you, Luther?" she asked quietly. "A vet does not have a clinic like this. I saw the scanner you used on the stalker. That is a mil-spec diagnostic unit. It costs more than this entire building. And the shielding on the roof, that is battleship grade." Luther stiffened. He turned back to the bandage, his movements becoming brisk and professional. "I got lucky at a salvage auction. You would be amazed what the military throws away." "You did not buy that at an auction," Grace pressed. "It has no serial numbers. It is a prototype." "I have friends in low places," Luther said, his voice shutting the door on the conversation. "Pass me the dermal regenerator, please." Grace passed him the tool, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. Luther was playing the role of the poor, eccentric doctor perfectly, but the cracks were showing. He had resources. He had authority. When he had spoken to the security team at Cinderate, he hadn't spoken like a civilian pleading for mercy. He had spoken like a commander issuing orders. That evening, the rumors caught up with them. Bolt floated into the kitchen where Grace was forcing herself to eat a bowl of the gray nutrient paste. It did indeed taste like despair, but with a hint of artificial vanilla. "Incoming transmission," Bolt announced. "Encrypted channel. It is the Spider Queen." Harper Wren, Luther, asked from the stove, where he was frying real eggs, a luxury that made the whole room smell like heaven. "The one and only," Luther tapped the console, and a holographic projection of Harper Wren sprang up on the table. She was sitting in what looked like a cargo container converted into an office, surrounded by screens. She looked tired, her glasses reflecting the blue light of her data streams. "Doctor," Harper said, her voice crackling with static. "And the bride. I see you are still alive. That is good. Usually Luther's guests have a survival rate of 50%. "Harper," Luther warned. "What do you want?" "I am just the messenger," Harper said, leaning back in her chair. "But you should know what is happening out here. The video of the incident at the docket is viral. 3 billion views in 12 systems. But Cyrus Fane is spinning it. She tapped a key, and a new window opened in the hologram. It was a clip from the nightly news. Cyrus Fane sat in a studio, looking heartbroken. A single, perfect tear tracked down his cheek. "I tried to help her," Cyrus was saying to the interviewer. "I knew she was troubled. I knew her biology was unstable. But when she attacked the station, when she threatened those children, I had to make a hard choice. I am offering a reward of 100,000 credits for information leading to her capture. Not for punishment. For her own safety. She is sick, and she needs help." Grace stared at the screen, the spoon bending in her hand until it snapped. "He lies," she whispered. "He lies with the face of an angel." "He is a politician," Harper said dryly. "Lying is his oxygen. But listen to me, Luther. The bounty hunters are already fueling up. 100,000 credits is enough to buy a small moon. They will comb the sector. You are in the shadow of the rift, so sensors are spotty, but they will find you eventually." "Let them come," Luther said, cracking an egg into the pan with a violence that broke the yolk. "I have beaten bounty hunters before." "Not this many," Harper warned. "And Luther, there is talk that the Trade Federation is getting involved. They are saying the Starfall was not natural. They are saying the wolf caused it. If they label her a terrorist, they will send a fleet, not a hunter." The transmission cut out. Silence filled the kitchen heavier than the gravity plating. Grace stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I have to leave." Luther didn't turn around. "Sit down, Grace. I am a danger to you. Harper is right. If a fleet comes, we will deal with it," Luther said. He turned, holding the pan. "Do you like your eggs runny or solid? I never asked." "Luther," Grace slammed her hand on the table. The metal dented. "Stop pretending this is normal. I am a monster with a price on my head. You are a vet with a drone and a leaking roof. You cannot fight the Federation." Luther set the pan down on the burner. He turned off the heat. He walked over to the table and looked at the dent her hand had made. He traced the shape of it with his finger. "I am not pretending," Luther said softly. "I know exactly what this is, and I know exactly who I am." He looked up at her. "Years ago," he began, his voice rough, "I made a lot of money doing things I thought were necessary. I built things, systems, engines. I thought if I made travel faster, cheaper, I was helping the galaxy." He paused. "I did not ask where the fuel came from. I did not ask who was digging it out of the ground or what it cost them." Grace watched him. The playfulness was gone. This was the man beneath the grease. "When I found out," Luther continued, "I tried to fix it with money. I built hospitals, I funded schools. I thought I could buy my way back to a clean conscience." He shook his head. "It does not work that way. You cannot pay for a life you broke with a check. You have to fix it with your hands." He looked at Grace. "I am not keeping you here to fight a fleet. I am keeping you here because for the first time in 20 years, I am looking at a problem that money cannot solve, but maybe decency can." Grace felt a lump in her throat. She had been bought and sold her whole life. She had been an asset, a liability, a pet, a monster. She had never been a chance for redemption. "I do not want to be your redemption," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to be free." "Then stay," Luther said. "Stay until the storm breaks. Stay until you are strong enough to walk out that door and make Cyrus Fane regret the day he learned your name. But do not run because you think you are protecting me. I can protect myself." Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she believed him. The storm hit 2 days later. It wasn't just rain, it was starfall. The sky above the moon turned a bruised purple, and the clouds swirled with iridescent grit. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. The clinic shook. The metal roof groaned under the assault of hail that was harder than diamond, and glowed with residual radiation. In the middle of the chaos, a ship punched through the atmosphere. It wasn't a hunter. It was a sleek, scientific vessel, white and pristine, looking completely out of place against the mud and the dark. It landed on the pad, crushing the flower bed Bolt had been trying to cultivate, and the ramp hissed open. A woman ran out, shielding her head with a kinetic umbrella. She was small, sharp-featured, and moving with the frantic energy of a person who had had too much caffeine and too little sleep. "Dr. Park," Luther said, opening the airlock as she stumbled inside. "You are early." Celine Park shook the radioactive rain off her coat. She looked at Luther, then at Grace, who was standing in the shadows of the hallway holding a large pry bar. "Is that her?" Celine asked, pointing. "The anomaly." "Her name is Grace," Luther said sharply, "and she is not an anomaly. She is a guest." Celine ignored the correction. She pulled a data slate from her pocket and threw it onto the nearest table. A holographic map of the sector sprang up. It was covered in red warning lines. "We do not have time for pleasantries," Celine said, her breath coming in gasps. "Look at the readings. The meridian rift. It is not just opening, Luther. It is tearing." She zoomed in on the map. A jagged line of black void was eating into the trade routes. "The Starfall cycle usually lasts 3 months," Celine explained, talking fast. "The particles drift in, we get some gravity waves, it passes. Standard physics. But this is exponential. The rift is expanding at a rate of 5% every hour. If it continues, it will swallow the Cinderate system in 4 days." Grace stepped forward, the pry bar lowered. "What is causing it?" Celine looked at her, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "You are," she said. Grace froze. "Me? Not you specifically," Celine corrected, pacing the room. "Your biology. Star wolves. We thought you were just big, strong predators adapted to high-gravity worlds. But the samples I took from the dock, the resonance readings are not just adapted to the void. You are part of it." She tapped the slate again. A diagram of a DNA helix appeared, but instead of standard bonds, the strands were connected by glowing particles. "Your cellular structure traps stardust," Celine said. "It resonates with the rift. What howl you did at the station. It was not magic. It was a phase lock. You stabilized the quantum field with your voice." Grace looked at her hands. The faint shimmer under her skin seemed to pulse, in time with the storm outside. "I have always felt the stars. They sing to me." "They are not singing," Celine said grimly. "They are screaming. The rift is a wound in space-time. And you, your species, you are the sutures," Luther frowned. "You are saying she can close it." "I am saying she is the only thing that can," Celine said. "But there is a problem. The energy required to close a rift this size is massive. Theoretically, a starwolf could channel it, but the strain. It would burn out their nervous system in seconds." Grace felt a cold chill settle in her stomach. "So I am a key," she said. "But using the key breaks it." "Exactly," Celine said. "That is why Cyrus wants you. He does not want to marry you. He wants to hook you up to a generator and drain you dry to stabilize his shipping lanes. He knows what you are. He has known for years." The realization hit Grace like a physical blow. The courtship, the flowers, the contract. It had never been about her. It had been about harvesting her. She was not a dinosaur-sized bride. She was a dinosaur-sized battery. "He will come for her," Luther said, his voice low and dangerous. "If he knows the rift is opening this fast, he will bring everything he has." "He is already on his way," Celine said. "My sensors picked up a fleet movement leaving the core worlds. 5 frigates. And a flagship. The Gilded Cage." Grace leaned against the wall. The room felt too small again. "I should go," she said. "If I leave, he will follow me away from here." "No," Luther said. "Luther, listen to her," Grace pleaded. "He has a fleet, you have a wrench." "I have more than a wrench," Luther said. He walked over to a wall panel that looked like a fuse box. He punched in a code 8 digits fast and complex. The wall panel slid open. Behind it was not a fuse box. It was a communications array glowing with encryption keys that Grace recognized from her time in the underground arenas. These were not civilian codes. These were high-level corporate override keys. "Bolt," Luther said. "Initialize protocol Dead Man's Hand." Bolt's eye turned red. "Are you sure, boss, that protocol will flag our location to every automated defense system in the sector? It is basically waving a giant flag that says, 'Here I am, come and get me.'" "Do it," Luther said. He turned to Grace. "I told you I was rich," he said. "I did not tell you how rich. I am not just wealthy, Grace. I am the majority shareholder of the Apex Drive Consortium, the company that builds the engines for Cyrus Fane's ships." Grace stared at him. Apex Drive, the richest corporation in the 12 galaxies. The man standing in front of her in a grease-stained jumpsuit owned the technology that powered civilization. "You," Grace stammered. "You could buy a planet." "I could buy a galaxy," Luther said. "But right now I am going to use that access to lock Cyrus out of his own navigation systems. It will not stop him, but it will slow him down. It will buy us time." "Time for what?" Celine asked. "Time to figure out how to close that rift without killing her," Luther said. He looked at Grace. "I promised you would not be alone. I meant it. We are not sacrificing you. We are going to fix this, my way." The clinic shook again as a clap of thunder exploded directly overhead. The lights flickered and died, leaving them illuminated only by the red glow of Bolt's eye and the golden shimmer of Grace's skin. In the dark, Grace looked at Luther. She saw the man who had rejected his own empire to fix broken things. She saw the fear in Celine's eyes. She felt the call of the rift in her bones, a terrible, aching demand to be whole. "Okay," Grace said in the darkness. Her voice was steady. "We fight." Outside, the wind howled, sounding eerily like a wolf calling to a pack that was finally, after 100 years of solitude, beginning to answer. The sound of the universe breaking was not a roar, as the movies always promised. It was a high, thin scratching, like sand being dragged across a sheet of glass, magnified until it vibrated in the teeth. Outside the clinic, the Starfall had ceased to be a weather event and had become a siege. The sky above the moon of designation 89 Alpha had been ripped open. What should have been the empty black of space was now a churning bruising, violet streaked with veins of angry gold. The atmospheric shields of the clinic groaned under the weight of the particulate matter, raining down stardust heavy and radioactive, piling up against the reinforced windows like glowing snow. Inside, the air filtration system was fighting a losing battle. The clinic smelled of ozone-burnt circuitry and fear. Grace stood by the isolation tanks, her hands pressed against the plexiglass. Inside, the creatures Luther had rescued were unraveling. The chromatic stalker was flashing rapidly, black, white, a strobe light of panic. In the next cage, a pair of avian gliders from the gas giant sector were beating their wings against the mesh, their high-pitched cries lost in the ambient hum of the storm. "They can feel it," Grace whispered. Her voice was tight, strained. "The gravity waves. It is like the floor is tilting inside their heads." Luther was at the main console, his fingers flying across the keys as he tried to reroute power to the stabilizing fields. He looked exhausted. Grease smeared his cheekbone, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. "It is not just gravity," Dr. Luther said, not looking up. "The rift is bleeding hard radiation and exotic particles. It is scrambling their navigational instincts. They do not know which way is up, so their biology is triggering a fight-or-flight response. Mostly flight." He slammed a final key, and the lights in the clinic flickered, then steadied to a dull, amber emergency glow. "That should hold the life support for another 6 hours," Luther said, exhaling a long breath. He turned to look at Grace. "How are you holding up?" "I am fine," Grace said. It was a lie, a terrible, obvious lie. Since the storm had intensified, Grace had been standing with her shoulders hunched, her arms wrapped around her torso, as if she were trying to hold herself together physically. Every time the wind shrieked outside, a spasm of pain crossed her face quick and sharp, which she immediately tried to mask with a stoic expression. Luther walked around the console. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way one approached a wounded animal that was liable to bite. "Grace," he said softly, "you are sweating, and your pupils are dilated to nearly 90% of your iris." "It is the lighting," she said, turning her face away. "It is pain," Luther corrected. He reached out but stopped inches from her arm, waiting for permission. "You are hurting. Why?" Grace let out a shuddering breath. She uncrossed her arms, and Luther saw it, a tremor running through her hands that was so violent it blurred the edges of her silhouette. "It burns," she admitted, her voice dropping to a growl of frustration. "Every time the dust hits the shield, every time the rift widens, it feels like someone is pulling a wire that is hooked into my chest." Luther frowned. He stepped closer, his medical instincts overriding his caution. "Chest wear," Grace hesitated, then pointed to the center of her sternum just below the hollow of her throat. "Here. It is deep. It has always been there, a dull ache, but now it is screaming." "Bolt!" Luther barked. "Bring me the deep tissue scanner, the military-grade one." "The one you are not supposed to have," Bolt's voice chirped from the ceiling rafters, where he was welding a loose support beam. "On it, boss." The drone zipped down, dropping a heavy handheld device into Luther's hand. Luther powered it on. The tip glowed with a harsh blue light. "I need you to sit down," Luther said to Grace. "I need to see what is under the skin." Grace sat on the edge of a reinforced crate. She looked small, despite her size huddled against the onslaught of the storm. Luther ran the scanner over her chest. The screen on the device washed out with static interference from the Starfall outside. "Too much background noise," Luther muttered. "Bolt maximize shielding on the triage bay. I need a clean signal." "Rerouting power from the toaster," Bolt replied. "Sacrifices must be made." The static cleared. On the small screen, a skeletal image of Grace's torso appeared. Her bones were dense, reinforced with natural carbon lattices, standard for a heavy worlder. Her heart was large and beat with a slow, powerful rhythm. But there, tangled in the complex nervous cluster behind her sternum, was a shadow. It was a jagged, artificial lump. It wasn't bone. It wasn't a tumor. It was metal, and it was pulsing. "What is that?" Luther asked, his voice cold. Grace looked at the screen. Her golden eyes widened, and a flash of a memory sharp and jagged as broken glass cut through her mind. The smell of cold iron. A table that was too small for her. Voices speaking a trade language she didn't understand. A man with a laser scalpel saying, "If we lock the core, the price doubles." The feeling of something cold being shoved into the warmth of her chest. "I do not know," Grace stammered. "I remember after the first time I was sold. I was young. I fought too much. The handlers said I was leaking energy. They said I needed a governor." "A governor." Luther looked at the image again. "That is not a governor, Grace. That is a dampener, and it is old. The casing is corroded. It is leaking heavy metals into your bloodstream, but more importantly, it is trying to suppress your bioresonance." He looked up at her, his eyes fierce. "The Starfall is calling to you. Your body is trying to answer to resonate with the particles. But this thing, it is like putting a lid on a volcano. The pressure is building up inside you, and it has nowhere to go. If we do not take it out, the feedback loop is going to stop your heart." Grace touched her chest. The pain was blinding now, a white-hot lance. "If you take it out, what happens? I do not know," Luther admitted. "But if I leave it in, you die in an hour." Grace looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of her, but fear for her. "Do it," she whispered. The procedure was not elegant. It was performed on a stainless steel table, in a room shaking from the atmospheric turbulence. Luther didn't use general anesthesia. Starwolf physiology was resistant to standard sedatives, and a higher dose might stop her respiration. Instead, he used a local nerve block and a generous amount of trust. "Stay with me, Grace," Luther said, his voice steady over the hum of the laser cutter. "Focus on my voice. Tell me about the first time you saw a star." "It was from a cage." Grace gritted out her claws, digging into the metal edges of the table, leaving deep gouges. "A transport ship. A viewport small as a coin. It looked cold." "Keep talking," Luther murmured. He was working fast, his hands moving with the precision of a master pianist. He made the incision. Blood, dark and rich as oil, welled up, shimmering with that same internal light. "Almost there. I see the casing. It is hooked into the vagus nerve. This is going to feel like a kick." He clamped the device with a pair of retractors. Grace threw her head back and let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was a harmonic distortion. The glass of the medicine cabinet shattered. Bolt, hovering nearby, dropped 2 feet in the air as his gyros failed. With a wet snap, Luther pulled the device free. He dropped the bloody piece of metal onto a tray. It was ugly, rusted, and pulsed with a dying, malevolent red light before fading to gray. "It is out," Luther breathed. Grace, look at me." Grace didn't look at him. She was looking at the air. The pain was gone. In its place was a sensation of rushing water, of a dam breaking. The room previously filled with the chaotic, aggressive dust of the Starfall that had leaked through the ventilation suddenly changed. The dust stopped falling. The glowing particles that had been coating the floor began to rise. They floated up, swirling like a murmuring flock of birds. They drifted toward the table. They drifted toward Grace. She sat up, the incision on her chest, already knitting together with visible speed, the starlight accelerating her cellular regeneration. She held out her hand. The dust condensed. It swirled into a tight vortex above her palm. Then, with a soft chime, it solidified. Resting in the center of her massive clawed hand was a perfect sphere of light. It wasn't hot. It was solid. It hummed with a melody that Luther could feel in his own bones. "Whoa!" Bolt said, rebooting his optical sensors. "I am going to need to update the safety manual. Rule number 52. No manufacturing celestial bodies in the recovery room." Grace stared at the sphere. "It is quiet," she whispered. "The noise in my head. It stopped." She looked at Luther. Her eyes were glowing so brightly, they illuminated the dark corners of the room. "I did this." "You wove it," a voice said from the doorway. Dr. Celine Park stood there, holding a tablet, her face pale. She had been watching from the observation deck. She walked in, ignoring the shattered glass on the floor. "That is a meridian anchor," Celine said, her voice trembling with scientific reverence. "It is a stabilized pocket of space-time. Starwolves, the legends said you could sing to the stars, but they were wrong. You do not sing to them. You structure them." Grace recoiled. She closed her hand, extinguishing the light of the sphere, though the physical weight of it remained in her palm. She looked at Luther, panic returning. "A tool," she said bitterly. "That is what the lock was for. To stop me from doing this until the buyer was ready. I am a machine that makes batteries." She slid off the table, backing away, until her back hit the cold wall. She looked at her hands as if they were traitors. "Is this why you saved me, Luther? Did you know? Did you see the value?" Luther stood by the table. He didn't step forward. He took off his bloody gloves and threw them in the waste bin. "I saved you because you were in pain," Luther said. His voice was flat honest. "I did not know about the weaving. I did not know about the lock. And frankly, I do not care about the sphere." He pointed to the tray, where the rusted metal lay. "That thing," Luther said, pointing at the dampener, "was put there by someone who wanted to own you. I took it out because I want you to own yourself. What do you do with that power? That is your choice. You can weave stars. You can throw them at people, or you can never do it again. It is yours, Grace, not mine, not Cyrus's, yours. Grace watched him. He was small, fragile, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. But he stood his ground, offering her nothing but the truth. I am dangerous, she said. We are all dangerous, Luther replied. I have a scalpel. Bolt has a laser cutter. You have stardust. It is not about the weapon, Grace. It is about where you aim it. Before Grace could answer, a proximity alarm blared through the clinic. It was a harsh, rhythmic klaxon that cut through the emotional silence like a knife. Proximity alert, Bolt announced, his voice dropping an octave to combat mode. Unidentified vessel entering lower atmosphere. Correction, identified vessel. It is big. It is shiny. And it is transmitting on all frequencies. Luther moved to the monitors. Show me. On the main screen, the storm clouds parted. Hovering above the clinic, looking like a dagger made of diamonds and arrogance, was a flagship. It was the gilded cage, Cyrus Fane's personal dreadnought. It was massive enough to block out the chaotic sky, casting a shadow that swallowed the entire crater. The comms channel crackled open. A hologram projected into the center of the clinic's triage bay. It was Cyrus Fane. He looked pristine, untouched by the storm, sitting in a chair that looked like a throne. Behind him, lawyers and armed guards stood in blurred focus. Grace, Cyrus said. His voice was magnified, filling the room. My dear, sweet, runaway bride. You look terrible. Grace stepped forward, the sphere of starlight still clutched in her hand. Get off my roof, Cyrus, Cyrus chuckled. Such fire. I knew the dampener was failing. My scientists told me the signal had stopped. That is why I came personally. He leaned forward, his holographic eyes locking onto hers. Listen to me, Grace. The rift is opening. The galaxy is hours away from collapse. You are the only one who can fix it. Come back to me. We will frame it as a reconciliation. You will be the face of the new era. I will put your image on every holoscreen from the core to the rim. You will be a goddess. A goddess in a cage is still a prisoner, Grace spat. I am not your poster. I am not your battery. Cyrus's face hardened. The charm evaporated. Then, you are a liability. I have a court order here signed by the High Council of the Trade Federation, declaring this clinic a harbor for a Class A biological weapon. That is you, Grace. He gestured to someone off-screen. Surrender her, Cyrus said to Luther, acknowledging him for the first time. Or I will instruct my ship to fire a localized plasma burst. I will vaporize this entire crater. I will claim she died in the explosion due to her own instability. A tragic accident. I will still get the sympathy vote. Luther walked up to the hologram. He stood toe-to-toe with the giant projection of the man who ruled the trade lanes. You are going to fire on a medical facility, Luther asked. I am sanitizing a threat, Cyrus corrected. You have 30 seconds. Luther reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small, antiquated communication device, a pure audio link, secure and untraceable. Bolt, Luther said calmly. Connect me to the board of directors. Priority Alpha 01. Connecting, Bolt said. Bypassing Fane's jamming. We are live. Luther spoke into the device. His voice changed. It wasn't the voice of the tired vet anymore. It was the voice of a man who was used to moving mountains with a whisper. This is shareholder L1, Luther said. Execute Bylaw 44 Section C. Immediate suspension of executive privileges for CEO Cyrus Fane, pending investigation into the unauthorized use of company assets for personal vendettas. Freeze his command codes. Authorization key Orion Break 0. On the hologram, the lights on Cyrus's bridge suddenly turned red. A siren could be heard in the background of the transmission. Cyrus jumped out of his chair. What is happening? Why are my screens locked? Luther looked at the hologram, his expression bored. I think your board of directors just realized that firing a company flagship at a registered charity clinic is bad for the quarterly projection, Cyrus. Your weapons are offline. Your navigation is locked to a holding pattern. Cyrus stared at Luther, his face twisting in confusion and rage. Who are you, L1? Hasn't voted in 20 years. That is a ghost seat. Ghosts can still haunt you, Luther said. Now get off my lawn, or I will have the board liquidate your personal stock options to pay for my roof. He tapped the device, and the hologram flickered and died. Silence returned to the clinic. Celine Park was staring at Luther with her mouth open. You just grounded the most powerful man in the sector with a phone call. Grace was looking at him too, but her expression was complicated. There was awe, yes, but there was also a retreating shadow. You own him, Grace said slowly. You own the company that built his ship. You own the company that made the dampener in my chest. Luther flinched. That hit the mark. I inherited the company, Luther said, his voice quiet. I did not build the dampener, Grace, but yes, the money I ran away from it came from the same machine that hurt you. He turned to her, his hands open. That is why I am here. That is why I am trying to stop him. I cannot change where the money came from, but I can control where it goes. Grace looked at the starlight sphere in her hand. It was beautiful. It was powerful. And it was terrifying. She looked at Luther, the man who had just wielded a different kind of power, a power of invisible strings and vast wealth. You used your power to save me, Grace said. Just now. Yes. But what happens when the emergency is over? Grace asked. Power likes to be used, Luther. Just like this star in my hand. It wants to be used. How do I know you won't turn into him? How do I know you won't decide that fixing things means controlling them? Luther didn't have a perfect answer. He knew the seduction of control. He had felt it just now, the satisfaction of crushing Cyrus. You don't know, Luther said honestly. You have to watch me. And if I start to turn into him, you have my permission to throw that star at my head. It was a joke, but it wasn't. Grace didn't smile, but she didn't leave. She closed her hand around the sphere, absorbing it back into her skin. The rift, Grace said, turning to Celine. How much time do we have? Celine checked her tablet. Cyrus is stalled, but the physics aren't. The rift is widening. The vacuum exposure is going to tear the atmosphere off this moon in 12 hours. Bolt, Luther called out. Did you get the coordinates? Calculating. Bolt, word. The epicenter of the meridian rift is located in the debris field of the old sector. It is a navigational nightmare. Asteroids, ion storms, and about 300 years of space junk. We need to go there, Grace said. Her voice was resolved now. She was done being the victim. If I can weave the stars, maybe I can weave the rift shut. It is a suicide run, Celine warned. The radiation levels at the epicenter. I will survive the radiation, Grace said. She looked at Luther. I am not sure about you. I have a very good lead-line suit, Luther said. And a very stubborn streak. He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a heavy, reinforced flight jacket. He put it on, covering the grease stains. He looked less like a vet and more like the captain he had never wanted to be. We take my ship, Luther said. The ambulance won't make it. I have a runner in the hangar below. It is fast, it is ugly, and it has no weapons. But it has the best engines money can buy. Grace walked to the window. She looked up at the sky where the purple bruises of the universe were pulsing. She could feel the connection now, the invisible thread that linked her heart to the breaking point of the galaxy. She looked at her hand where the starlight lay dormant under her skin. Luther, she said softly. Yeah. Celine said I am the key. She did. Grace turned to him. Her eyes were sad but clear. If I am the key, then who is the lock? The rift didn't just open Luther. Someone opened it. Someone broke the door. Luther stopped zipping his jacket. He exchanged a dark look with Bolt. "That," Luther said grimly, "is exactly what I am afraid we are going to find out." He hit the button to open the blast doors to the lower hangar. "Let's go, before Cyrus figures out how to override a shareholder veto." They moved toward the depths of the clinic, leaving the storm outside, walking into the darkness to find the thing that was breaking the world. The moon's horizon burned like a slow-motion warning. It was not the clean orange burn of a sunrise, but the sickly bruising violet of a bruised sky. The atmosphere, usually thin and cold, was now thick with the particulate matter of the Starfall, churning like a pot of boiling oil. Inside the clinic, the air tasted of recycled anxiety and ozone. The perimeter alarms had ceased to be a warning and had become a constant rhythmic heartbeat of the building. Blare, silence, blare, silence. Luther stood by the main viewport in the command center, his hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. Outside, beyond the flickering energy shield of the clinic, the darkness was alive with lights that did not belong to the stars. "They are tightening the circle," Dr. Luther said, his voice flat. Grace stood behind him. She was pacing a restless, predatory movement that covered the length of the room in 3 strides. The golden shimmer of her skin was dull, today dampened by exhaustion and stress. "Private military contractors," Grace said, listening to the hum of the engines outside with her sensitive ears. "I can hear the turbine pitch. Those are heavy assault drones, Viper class. They are not here to arrest anyone, Luther. They are here to level the ground. Cyrus calls it a sanitation protocol," Luther replied, turning from the window. He looked tired. The grease stains on his jumpsuit were fresh, but the circles under his eyes were old. "He claims the clinic is contaminated. He has locked down the airspace. Nothing goes in, nothing goes out." "Then give me to him," Grace said. It was the 3rd time she had said it in the last hour. Luther slammed his hand against the metal bulkhead. The sound was sharp, shocking in the tension of the room. "No," he said. "Luther, look at your patients." Grace gestured toward the secure wing where the animals were housed. Even through the soundproofing, they could feel the vibration of panicked creatures. "The chromatic stalker is turning gray from stress. The gliders are smashing themselves against the walls. If Cyrus fires, they die. If I walk out there, he leaves." "If you walk out there," Luther said, stepping into her space, looking up at her with fierce intensity, "he takes you. He straps you to a table. He drains you until you are a husk, and then he uses the power you give him to strangle the trade routes of 12 galaxies. I am not saving you just to feed you to the wolf Grace, especially when the wolf is a man in a polyester suit." "I am the wolf," Grace roared the sound, vibrating in the floor plates. "I am the one they want." "You are a person," Luther shouted back, "and in this house we do not trade lives. Not for safety, not for money, not for anything." Interrupting this very dramatic moment with a tactical update, a mechanical voice chirped from the ceiling. Bolt descended, spinning his single ocular lens. He was currently equipped with a welding torch on one manipulator arm and a fire extinguisher on the other. "The shields are holding at 40%, Bolt announced. "But the interference from the rift is messing with the harmonics. Also, the assault drones are scanning for a weakness in the ventilation shafts. I have taken the liberty of welding the vents shut. It will get stuffy in here, but at least we won't have a grenade for breakfast." "Thank you, Bolt," Luther said, rubbing his temples. "I would like to note," Bolt continued, "that I was programmed for surgical assistance and interior design critique. I was not programmed for siege warfare. If I get shot, I am going to be very passive-aggressive about it in the afterlife." "There is no afterlife for drones," Grace said, her anger deflating into hopelessness. "Not with that attitude," Bolt retorted. A new sound cut through the room, the chime of an incoming transmission. It wasn't the aggressive hail of Cyrus's fleet. It was a low-frequency ping, bouncing off 3 different satellites to mask its origin. Luther rushed to the console. It is Harper. He keyed the encryption sequence. The holographic table sputtered, then resolved into the image of Harper Wren. The information broker looked even more disheveled than usual, surrounded by half-eaten takeout containers and blinking server towers. "Doctor," Harper said, not looking up from her keyboard. "You are popular today. You have more guns pointed at you than a pirate king." "Nice to see you too, Harper," Luther said. "Do you have a way out?" "I always have a way out. That is why I am expensive," Harper grinned, though it didn't reach her eyes. "But this one is tricky. Cyrus has a legal blockade. If you launch a ship, he is authorized to shoot it down as a biohazard containment measure. He has the law on his side." "I do not care about the law," Luther said. "I care about the hole in the sky." "Right. The rift," Harper tapped a key. "I have a contact. Jax Calder. He runs a blockade runner called the Rusty Needle. He is currently holding orbit on the dark side of the moon, hiding in the magnetic shadow of a debris field." "I know Jax," Luther said. "He charges triple for hazardous cargo." "He is doing this for free," Harper said. "Or rather, he is doing it for a favor. He wants you to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the contents of his cargo hold for the next 5 years. No questions asked," Luther sighed. "Fine. If he is smuggling illegal synth cheese, I do not want to know. Does he have a route?" "He has plotted a trajectory through the magnetic storm," Harper explained. "It is suicide. You have to fly manual, no sensors through the thickest part of the Starfall radiation. Cyrus's drones won't follow you in there because their guidance chips will fry. But your ship, it needs to be shielded like a tank." "My ship is ready," Luther said. "Good. But you have to get off the ground first," Harper warned. "The moment you drop the shields to launch, Cyrus will fire. You need a distraction, or a miracle." "I have a miracle," Grace said softly, looking at her hands. "No," Luther said. "You are not using the resonance to fight. It drains you too fast. We need you strong for the rift." "Then we need a legal miracle," Harper said. "Cyrus is operating under a corporate seizure mandate. The only thing that overrides a seizure mandate is a superior ownership claim. But unless you have the deed to the moon in your back pocket, you are out of luck." Luther went very still. He looked at the console. He looked at Grace, who was watching him with trusting golden eyes. He looked at the walls of the clinic he had built to hide from his past. "Luther," Grace asked, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "Harper," Luther said, his voice hollow. "Open a wideband transmission, universal frequency. Override Cyrus's jamming." "That requires an alpha-level clearance code," Harper said. "I can't hack that." "You don't have to hack it," Luther said. "Input this code, Vein 01, Alpha Omega." Harper paused. On the hologram, her eyes went wide behind her glasses. "Vein, as in the Vein family, the Apex Consortium." "Just do it," Luther snapped. Grace stepped back. "Luther." Harper typed the code. The transmission light turned green. "You are live, Doctor. Broadcasting to the entire fleet and the sector news feeds." Luther leaned into the microphone. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man confessing to a murder. "This is Luther Vane," he spoke, his voice carrying a weight of authority that Grace had never heard before. "Majority shareholder of the Apex Consortium. I am asserting ownership of the structure located at coordinates 89 Alpha. This facility is a private research subsidiary of Apex. Any hostile action taken against it constitutes an attack on the Consortium's core assets." He paused, swallowing hard. "I am revoking the seizure mandate issued to Cyrus Fane. Effective immediately, his security clearance is suspended, pending an internal audit of his financial conduct. Any vessel firing on this location will have their engine licenses permanently revoked." Silence. Outside the perimeter, alarms stopped. The threatening hum of the Viper drones faded as they received the new orders, hard-coded into their very manufacturing protocols, to never attack the hand that built them. Luther cut the transmission. He slumped against the console. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. Vane. Grace's voice was a whisper, but it cut deeper than a claw. Luther Vane. The man who owns the fuel. Luther turned slowly. Grace was standing across the room, but the distance between them felt like light years. She looked at him with horror. "The fuel," she said, her voice trembling. "The star fuel. It comes from us. From my people. From the wolves you hunt." "I did not know," Luther said. "Not at first. My grandfather built the company. I just inherited the dividends. When I found out, when I saw the reports, I ran. I took my share of the money and I built this place. I tried to save the things the company broke." "You own the company," Grace said. "You are the richest man in 12 galaxies. You could have stopped it. You could have shut it down." "It is not that simple," Luther shouted, the desperation breaking through. "The board, the contracts, the economy of 1,000 worlds relies on that fuel. If I shut it off, billions starve. Systems collapse. I was a coward, Grace. I thought if I walked away, if I saved a few broken animals, it would balance the scale." "You saved me," Grace said, her eyes cold. "Was I just another deposit in your moral bank account? A way to make yourself feel better about the blood on your money?" "No," Luther whispered. "You were never that." "How can I believe you?" Grace asked. "You are him. You are Cyrus, just with a dirtier coat." "I am not him," Luther said. "Cyrus wants to use you to keep the system running. I want to help you break it. Why do you think I just broadcasted my name? I just painted a target on my back. The board will come for me. The shareholders will sue me into oblivion. I just gave up my anonymity, my safety, everything to buy you 5 minutes to launch that ship." Grace looked at him. She saw the shaking of his hands. She saw the terrified truth in his eyes. He had blown up his life, the safe, hidden life he had built to stop the drones. "Why?" she asked. "Because," Luther said, looking at her, "I am tired of being the man who owns the world. I would rather be the man who helps you save it." The night, or what passed for night in the storm, was a restless, heavy thing. The blockade had pulled back to a holding distance, confused by the conflicting legal orders. Jax Calder sent a coded signal launch window in 3 hours. Prepare for turbulence. Grace found Luther in the cargo bay of the small runner ship he kept prepped. He was checking the fuel lines, his movements mechanical. She walked up the ramp. The air in the bay was cold. "We need to do this," Grace said. Luther didn't look up from the engine manifold. "Do what the pre-flight check, I am on it." "No," Grace said. "The seeing." Luther froze. He put down the wrench. He turned to face her. "The seeing." "It is a custom," Grace said. She stepped closer. "Among my people. Before a hunt. Before a mate selection. Before a death. We do not trust words. Words are easy. Words can be bought. We trust the body." She reached for the collar of her flight suit. With a slow, deliberate movement, she unzipped it. She pulled the fabric down, exposing her shoulder, her collarbone, the curve of her upper chest. Her skin was a map of violence. There were white, jagged lines where electro whips had cut her in the arenas. There were circular burns from containment prods. And in the center of her chest, the fresh pink scar where Luther had removed the dampener. But under the scars, the bioluminescence pulsed. It was a soft, golden rhythm, syncing with her heartbeat. "Look at me, Luther," she commanded. "Do not look away." Luther looked. He didn't flinch. He didn't look with pity. And he didn't look with the hungry gaze of a collector. He looked with the reverence of an astronomer discovering a new galaxy. "I see you," Luther whispered. "Do you?" Grace asked. "You see the monster, the dinosaur, the weapon." "I see the survivor," Luther said. He reached out his hand, hovering over the scar on her shoulder. "I see the history, and I see the light." Grace took his hand. Her skin was cool. His was warm. She placed his palm against the scars. "Now you," she said. Grace, I don't have scars like this, Luther said, pulling back slightly. I have paper cuts. I have privilege. Show me, she insisted. Show me the coward. Show me the guilt. Show me the part of you that you hate. Luther hesitated. Then slowly, he unbuttoned his cuff. He rolled up his sleeve. There were no physical scars, but his arm was shaking. He looked at her, and he let the mask fall. He let her see the exhaustion, the self-loathing, the desperate need to be good that consumed him like a sickness. I stayed silent, Luther confessed, his voice breaking. For 10 years. I signed the dividend checks. I knew they were mining living creatures. I told myself it was just biology. I told myself I was just one man. That is my scar, Grace. It does not heal. It just gets deeper. Grace looked at him. She saw the truth. It was ugly, but it was real. Silence is a heavy weight, Grace said. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. She placed her forehead against his. She was so much taller, she had to lean down, enveloping him in her shadow. But you broke the silence today. I did, Luther breathed. Then we are even, Grace whispered. We are both broken things trying to fix a broken world. She didn't kiss him. It wasn't human enough for that. Instead, she let out a low, vibrating purr in her chest, a sound of acceptance, of pack bonding. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him against the solid, terrifying strength of her body. Luther buried his face in the curve of her neck. He smelled ozone and stardust. For the first time in his life, the richest man in 12 galaxies felt like he owned nothing, and it felt like freedom. I am not your project, Grace murmured into his hair. No, Luther agreed. And you are not my savior. God, no. Good, she said. Then we are partners. 1 hour to launch. The main hangar of the clinic was a mess. Bolt was zooming back and forth, vacuuming up piles of glowing dust. I just swept this sector, Bolt complained. Grace, you are shedding cosmological dandruff everywhere. It is a slip hazard. If I rust because of stardust, I am suing for workplace negligence. Grace was sitting in the center of the room practicing. Celine Park stood by the monitors watching the biometrics. Heart rate is stabilizing, she noted. But the energy output is spiking. Careful, Grace. Grace held her hands out. The air around her claws shimmered. She wasn't just glowing now. She was manipulating the matter of the Starfall. She concentrated, remembering the feeling of the sphere she had made earlier. Not a weapon, she told herself. A stitch. A thread. The dust swirled. It formed a complex weaving pattern like a basket made of light. It rotated between her hands, humming. It is beautiful, Luther said, checking the straps on his flight suit. It is heavy, Grace grunted. The sweat was beading on her forehead. It fights me. The rift, it wants to be open. It is like trying to hold a door shut against a hurricane. The rift is expanding, Celine warned, her voice tight. We are losing the window. The atmospheric integrity of the moon is dropping to 30%. If we don't leave now, the turbulence will be too strong for the ship. Cyrus, Luther asked. He is moving, Harper's voice came over the comms. He has ignored your legal order. Or rather, he found a loophole. He is claiming he is escorting you for your own protection. He is launching his personal interceptor. He wants to be there when she closes the rift. He wants the photo op. Let him come, Grace said. She crushed the weaving of light in her hands, absorbing the energy back into her body. She stood up. She looked massive in her flight gear, a warrior made of myth and modern armor. If he gets too close, I will weave his engine into a knot. That is the spirit, Bolt said. Violence. I like it. They boarded the runner ship. It was a sleek, narrow vessel, stripped of all luxury for pure speed. The cockpit was cramped. Grace had to squeeze into the co-pilot seat, which Luther had modified by ripping out the cushioning to accommodate her frame. Luther strapped in. He looked at the controls. No autopilot. No sensors. Just manual thrust and grit. Ready, he asked. Grace placed her hand on the dashboard. The ship seemed to hum in response to her touch. "Ready," she said. "Bolt, you have the turret," Luther ordered. "It is a mining laser, not a weapon, so you have to be precise." "I am a surgeon," Bolt said. "I can circumcise a gnat at 500 yards. Let's fly." Luther punched the throttle. The ship shot out of the hangar like a bullet leaving a chamber. Immediately the world turned into noise. The wind of the Starfall hammered the hull. The ship bucked violently, throwing them against their restraints. "Gravity shear!" Luther shouted over the roar. "Compensating!" He wrestled the stick, his hands flying across the manual thrusters. Outside the viewport, the moon fell away. But there was no black space to greet them. There was only the storm, a wall of purple and gold, a swirling vortex of debris and radiation that stretched for 1,000,000 miles. "There," Grace pointed. Ahead through the haze, a jagged tear in the fabric of reality pulsed. It was the meridian rift. It looked like a wound in the universe, bleeding darkness into the light. And right behind them, cutting through the storm with military-grade stabilizers, was Cyrus's interceptor. "He is gaining," Bolt announced. "And he is hailing us." "Ignore him," Luther said. "Eyes on the rift." "Luther," Grace said, her voice strained, as the proximity to the rift began to pull at the very atoms of her body. "It is singing. It is so loud." "Sing back," Luther said, pushing the engines to 110%. "Sing it to sleep, Grace." They plunged into the heart of the storm. The view from the cockpit was not of space, but of a wound. The meridian rift did not look like a phenomenon of physics. It looked like a biological catastrophe on a cosmic scale. It was a tear in the fabric of the night, bleeding violet light and dragging the surrounding stars into its maw. The debris field of the old sector, shattered asteroids, derelict ships, and clouds of frozen gas swirled around the opening like water circling a drain. Luther wrestled with the yoke of the runner ship. The metal groaned under his hands, the vibrations traveling up his arms and rattling his teeth. "Gravity shear at 400%, Luther shouted over the roar of the engines. "The inertial dampeners are crying, Grace. I can actually hear them crying." "It is not the dampeners," Grace said. She was strapped into the co-pilot seat, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands gripping the dashboard so hard the plastic casing had cracked. "It is the rift. It is hungry." "Hungry is fine," Bolt chirped from the rear turret mount, though his synthesized voice quivered with static. "Hungry I can deal with. But if we die, I am going to write a 1-star review for this trip. Terrible atmosphere, rude gravity, would not recommend to a friend." "Focus, Bolt," Luther snapped, banking the ship hard to the left to avoid a tumbling piece of a frigate hull that was the size of a city block. They were flying into the throat of the storm. The Starfall was not just dust here. It was a blizzard of high-energy particles that hammered against the shields like hail. Every impact lit up the cockpit with blinding flashes of white. "We are at the threshold," Dr. Celine Park called out from the small engineering station behind them. Her face was illuminated by the red wash of warning lights. "Radiation levels are critical. Luther, the shielding on this ship is good, but it is not infinite. We have 20 minutes before the hull starts to delaminate." "20 minutes to sew up the sky," Luther muttered. "No pressure." Suddenly, the proximity alarm screamed a sound distinct from the environmental warnings. "Contact," Bolt yelled. "Fast mover, 12 o'clock high. It is the interceptor." Luther looked up. Cutting through the chaotic purple haze of the rift was Cyrus Fane's personal ship. It was a masterpiece of engineering, sleek and predatory, riding the gravity waves with stabilizers that cost more than the entire moon they had just left. The interceptor didn't fire. Instead, it matched their speed, hovering just above them, like a bird of prey deciding where to strike. "He is hailing us," Luther said. "Wideband. He is broadcasting to the whole sector again." "Put him on," Grace said, opening her eyes. They were glowing with a terrifying intensity. "I want to see him," Luther punched the comms. A holographic projection of Cyrus Vane appeared on the dashboard, flickering slightly with the interference. He was sitting in his cockpit, looking calm, composed, and infuriatingly perfect. "Dr. Vane," Cyrus said, his voice smooth. "And my dear Grace, you are making this very dramatic. Flying into a gravity well in a tin can? Is this your idea of a romantic getaway?" "We are here to fix the mess you ignored, Cyrus," Luther said through gritted teeth. "Back off. Your wake turbulence is destabilizing our approach." "I am not here to stop you," Cyrus smiled, checking his nails. "I am here to supervise. The galaxy is watching Luther. I have 3 news drones trailing my position. When Grace closes that rift, I want to make sure the credit goes to the right place. The Trade Federation needs a hero, and I have decided that hero is going to be the Cyrus Vane Initiative." "You want to brand the apocalypse?" Luther asked, incredulous. "Saving the galaxy is not to hang a medal on your neck, Cyrus." Cyrus laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "You say that because you have money, Luther. You have had the luxury of morality your whole life, because your grandfather filled your accounts before you were born. The rest of us, we have to seize our moments." He leaned into the camera. "Grace," Cyrus said, "do it. Be the savior. Fix the rift. And when you are done, my medical team is ready to receive you. You will be exhausted. You will need care." "Care," Grace repeated, her voice low. "Like you cared for the others." "I do not know what you mean," Cyrus said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I think you do," Grace said. She unbuckled her restraints. "Grace, what are you doing?" Luther shouted, as the ship lurched, violently hit by a wave of distortion. "I cannot weave through the hull," Grace said. She stood up, bracing herself against the ceiling. "I have to go out." Out where?" Luther looked at the airlock. "It is a vacuum. It is pure radiation." "I am a Star Wolf," Grace said. "Space is not my enemy. It is my origin." She moved to the airlock. Luther engaged the autopilot, which was struggling to keep them straight, and scrambled out of his seat. He grabbed her arm. "Grace, if you go out there, the exposure will fuel me," Grace said. She looked at him, and for a second the glowing fierceness softened. "Keep the ship steady, Luther. I will handle the thread." She stepped into the airlock. The inner door hissed shut. Luther ran back to the pilot's seat, watching the external monitors. The outer airlock door cycled open. Grace did not float out. She launched herself. She emerged into the violet chaos of the rift, not as a woman, but as a creature of pure energy. Her flight suit shredded instantly under the pressure, but beneath it her skin had hardened, turning into a diamond-hard carapace of bioluminescence. She grew, her form expanding, as she absorbed the ambient energy of the Starfall. She was a giant against the backdrop of the breaking universe. Grace threw her head back and howled. In the vacuum of space there was no sound, but the radio waves picked up the resonance, a song that vibrated the hull of Luther's ship. She reached out with claws that were now made of solidified light. She grabbed the edges of the rift. The memories hit her then. It wasn't just the pain of the radiation. It was the psychic backlash of the rift itself. As she connected with the energy, the history of the fuel flooded her mind. She smelled cold iron. She felt the chafing of chains. She heard the voices of auctioneers. 1 ounce of essence, pure grade, extracted from a juvenile male. "It burns too fast. I need something with more shelf life. Show me the female." "The wolves are just carriers. The fuel is in the marrow. You have to crush them to get it." Grace screamed, a psychic shockwave that rocked both ships. Inside the runner, Celine Park gasped, dropping her tablet. She was staring at the energy readings from the rift and comparing them to a file on her screen. "Oh no," Celine whispered. "Oh God, no!" "What?" Luther yelled, fighting to keep the ship from flipping over. "The resonance signature," Celine said, her voice shaking. "I just matched the energy coming from the rift with the chemical composition of Apex drive fuel. The standard fuel. The stuff in every ship in the fleet. Luther froze. What are you talking about? It is the same, Celine cried, looking at Luther with horror. The fuel is not mined from gas giants, Luther. It never was. The star fuel that runs the economy, it is processed Starwolf bioenergy. They have been hunting them, farming them, draining them for 50 years. The world seemed to stop for Luther. He looked at the dashboard, at the Apex Consortium logo stamped on the throttle, at the fuel gauge of his own ship. He wasn't just the heir to a company. He was the heir to a slaughterhouse. Luther, Cyrus's voice broke through the comms, mocking and triumphant. Your scientist is clever. Took you long enough to figure it out. Luther stared at the hologram. You knew. We all knew at the top level, Cyrus said. Your grandfather knew. My father knew. Why do you think starwolves are rare? Why do you think we labeled them dangerous to justify the harvest, Luther? Civilization needs power. They are the batteries. We just built the sockets. Luther felt bile rise in his throat. Every credit in his bank account, every piece of technology he had ever used, every meal he had ever bought it, was all paid for with the blood of Grace's kind. You are monsters, Luther whispered. We are businessmen, Cyrus shouted. And right now, that creature out there is not just closing a rift. She is concentrating enough energy to power the core worlds for a century. Get out of the way, Luther. I am going to capture her. The market is going to skyrocket. Luther looked out the window. Grace was struggling. She was weaving the dust, pulling the edges of the rift together with threads of light, but she was fading. The realization, the truth of her people's fate was crushing her will. She was slowing down. She was just a battery to them. That was all she had ever been. Luther looked at his hands. The hands of the richest man in 12 galaxies. Hands that had tried to be clean, but were stained deeper than he could ever wash. Bolt, Luther said. His voice was dead calm. Yeah, boss. Access the Apex mainframe. Use my overriding shareholder clearance, the Dead Man's Hand protocol. You already used that to lock Cyrus out, Bolt said. No, Luther said. Not the lockout protocol, the burn protocol. Celine stared at him. Luther, if you do that, you wipe the database, the banking records, the patents, the supply chain algorithms. You will bankrupt the company. You will destroy the economy of 12 sectors. The economy is built on murder, Luther said. He looked at Cyrus's hologram. You want to talk about business, Cyrus? Let's talk about liquidation. You wouldn't dare, Cyrus sneered, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. You will be a pauper. You will be nothing. Luther punched the authorization code into the console. It was a long sequence, one his grandfather had given him on his deathbed as a safeguard against a hostile takeover. He had never intended to use it. I would rather be a pauper than a parasite, Luther said. He hit enter. Executing, Bolt chirped. Deleting financial reserves. Publishing classified research files to the public net. Sending the coordinates of every illegal harvesting facility to the galactic media. Oh, and I am liquidating your personal assets and donating them to the Society for the Protection of Space Yaks. It seemed appropriate. No, Cyrus screamed. On his bridge, sparks began to fly as his systems crashed the central banking servers, rejecting his credentials in real time. Stop it! You are ruining everything. I am just balancing the books, Luther said. Outside, the shockwave of the data dump hit the local network, but the physical battle was still raging. Grace had stopped weaving. She was floating in the center of the rift, holding a massive condensed star of pure energy in her hands. It was the key to closing the rift. Or the key to destroying the fleet. She turned. Her giant, glowing eyes looked through the hull of the runner ship straight at Luther. She heard Cyrus. She heard the truth. She drifted toward the cockpit. She held the star out. It was blindingly bright, pulsating with the power of 1,000 suns. Luther watched her. He unbuckled his seatbelt. He walked to the glass of the canopy. "Grace," he shouted, though she couldn't hear him. He pressed his hand against the glass. Grace hovered there. She projected her voice into his mind, a telepathic link forged by the resonance. "Take it," her voice echoed in his head. "It is what you want, isn't it? Infinite power, infinite wealth. You can rebuild your empire. You can be the king who saved the wolf." She was testing him. She was offering him the very thing his family had killed millions to possess. She was giving him the choice: rule the galaxy, or let it go. Cyrus's ship moved closer, his tractor beams locking onto Grace. "Take it, Luther. Grab the containment unit. We can split the profits." Luther looked at the star. It was beautiful. It was everything. He looked at Grace. She looked tired. She looked broken. She looked like she was waiting for the inevitable betrayal. Luther raised his hand. He didn't reach for the star. He made a fist, and then slowly he opened his fingers. He pushed his palm outward, a gesture of release. "Let it go," he mouthed. Grace's eyes widened. "I do not want it," Luther projected back, pouring every ounce of his regret and his love into the thought. "I do not want the power. I just want you." Grace stared at him for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity. She smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. She turned back to the rift. She didn't keep the star. She didn't give it to Luther. She didn't let Cyrus take it. She smashed it. Grace drove the condensed sphere of starlight directly into the center of the meridian rift. "Brace for impact!" Bolt shrieked. The star detonated. But it wasn't an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of creation. The energy release didn't tear the universe apart. It glued it back together. The threads of stardust expanded, weaving through the tear in space-time, faster than the eye could follow. The violet wound turned white, then gold, then faded into the quiet dark blue of healed space. The rift snapped shut. The shockwave hit the ships. Luther was thrown back against the bulkhead. The artificial gravity failed. Sparks showered from the ceiling. The world spun in a chaotic tumble of metal and light. Then silence. Luther woke up on the ceiling. He groaned, peeling his face off a cooling vent. The emergency lights were pulsing with a slow, red rhythm. "Report," he croaked. "Hull integrity at 10%. Bolt's voice came from somewhere under a pile of cables. "Engine 1 is gone. Engine 2 is on vacation. But life support is holding." Grace, Luther scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He looked out the viewport. The rift was gone. The stars were back, steady, calm, and distant. The debris field was drifting quietly. Floating near the nose of the ship was a figure. She wasn't giant anymore. She was human-sized, drifting in the vacuum. Her flight suit tattered, her glow, dim but steady. "Get the retrieval arm," Luther ordered, his voice cracking. They brought her in. When the airlock cycled, Luther didn't wait for the decontamination sequence. He ripped the door open. Grace lay on the metal floor. She was breathing, shallow hitching breaths, but breathing. Her skin was gray. The bioluminescence faded to a faint ember deep in her chest. Luther fell to his knees beside her. He checked her pulse. It was slow but strong. Her eyes fluttered open. They weren't blinding gold anymore. They were just amber. Warm, soft amber. "You," she whispered, her voice rasping. "Me," Luther said, tears finally spilling over cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "I am here." "The star," Grace murmured. "You didn't take it." "I told you," Luther said, brushing the hair back from her forehead. "I am a terrible businessman." Grace let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "Cyrus," Luther looked up at the monitor. Cyrus's interceptor was drifting dead in space. Its lights were dark. "Bolt gave me a status update," Luther said. "His systems are fried from the feedback. And his accounts are empty. The galactic marshals are already en route. Not for you. For him. The files I released are everywhere. The harvesting operations. The illegal blockades. He is finished." "And you?" Grace asked. You released your files too. Luther sat back sitting on the cold floor of his broken ship. He checked his risk comp. It was flashing red. Account balance 0.00 credits. Assets seized. Status under investigation. I am broke, Luther said. A strange light feeling bubbled up in his chest. He started to laugh. It was a hysterical, joyful sound. Grace, I am completely, utterly broke. I do not own a moon. I do not own a ship. I do not even own the shirt I am wearing because it has the company logo on it. You are poor, Grace said, a smile tugging at her lips. Like a rat. Worse than a rat, Luther beamed. Rats have holes. I have nothing. Grace reached out. She took his hand. Her grip was weak, but it was there. You have me, she said. Luther looked at her. He squeezed her hand. That is a bad investment. You are high maintenance. I eat a lot, she agreed. We will figure it out, Luther said. I am a good vet. Animals do not care about credit ratings. I can fix goats. I can fix cats. And wolves, Grace asked. Luther kissed her knuckles. Especially wolves. Epilogue, 3 months later. The clinic on designation 89 Alpha was gone, seized by the creditors. But nobody had found the small mobile transport shuttle parked on the edge of a terraforming colony in the outer rim. The sign above the door was hand-painted and crooked, Luther Associates Veterinary Services Welding. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and cheap coffee. Luther was trying to put a splint on the leg of a swamp lizard that was trying to bite him. Hold still, you little demon, Luther muttered. I am trying to help you. He does not like your bedside manner, Bolt said, hovering nearby with a roll of bandages. You smell like poverty. I smell like hard work, Luther corrected. There is a difference. The door chime rang. Grace walked in. She was carrying a crate of supplies. She wore simple mechanic's coveralls, grease-stained at the knees. She looked healthy. Her skin had a healthy sheen, and her eyes were bright. She wasn't hiding her height anymore. She walked with the easy confidence of someone who owned the space she occupied. Mail call, Grace said, dropping the crate on the counter. We got paid. 4 chickens and a bag of potatoes. We are rich, Luther said, looking at the potatoes with genuine appreciation. Tonight we feast. Grace walked over to him. She leaned down and kissed him, quick and familiar. There is a message for you too, she said. From the new Federation Council. They want to know if the savior of the Meridian Rift would like to attend a gala in her honor. What did you tell them? Luther asked. I told them I was busy, Grace said. She picked up a wrench and twirled it in her fingers. I have a fence to fix, and a lizard to hold down. She looked at her hand. Faintly deep under the skin, a tiny speck of starlight pulsed. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a battery. It was just a part of her, like her heartbeat. You know, Grace said softly, I used to think that star in my hand was the only thing that made me valuable. Luther looked up from the lizard. And now, Grace smiled. She looked at Luther, the man who had given up the world to keep her safe. She looked at Bolt, who was currently arguing with the lizard. She looked at the small, messy life they had built from the wreckage. Turns out, Grace said, placing a star in the hand is not giving power. It is returning the right to live. From billionaire to potato farmer, Bolt sighed. From monster to mechanic. What a downgrade. Luther laughed, wrapping his arm around Grace's waist. I don't know, Luther said, looking at the woman he loved. I think it is the best deal I ever made. Outside, the sky was clear. The stars were silent, no longer screaming, just watching, waiting for the next story to begin.